Hello and welcome to the Clean Energy Pod powered by SSE, your guide to the people and technologies delivering the clean energy transition. On today's edition, we hear from Claire Mack, Chief Executive of Scottish Renewables, the trade body for the industry here in Scotland, which is one of the wettest and windiest countries anywhere on Earth. Unsurprisingly, given those natural resources, the industry is hoping to ramp up generation significantly in the years ahead. And on today's edition, we'll hear some of the challenges and opportunities for the business here in Scotland. Claire, thanks so much for joining us. Claire, you're Chief Executive of Scottish Renewables, which is the industry body for renewables here in Scotland. And we are here in Scotland. Let's start off with that. It's a wonderful country. We both live here, but it's wet and it's often windy. We're talking in a summer month where it's been raining and been quite windy as well. Scotland should really be leading the world from a renewables perspective. Your job should really be easy, is it?
My job is easy because I love it, because it is a fantastic industry to be part of. In terms of world leading, it's always an interesting phrase, and we have to kind of reflect a bit on that. We've got to remember who's also in this race, right? So anybody who wants to be world leading or claims to be world leading in our sector has to expect to be beaten quite quickly, because everybody in the world wants to do what we're doing. What Scotland is really, really good at is bringing together a plethora of different renewable energy technologies. That's what we're really blessed with, right? It's not just the wind and the sun. We've actually got, amazing islanded communities who are already demonstrating that it is possible to be almost 100% renewable, and to run your entire sort of space and place through sort of using electricity rather than relying on gas or other fuels. And I think that is what's good. Is what's going to happen to the energy system as we go forward is it's going to be a patchwork, and it is going to be a system. It's not going to be any one technology. And that's where we do really, really get to run with it here in Scotland, is that we've got tidal up in Orkney, which really is the world leading centre for tidal, actually. But we also have a really long history of wind. Onshore wind being the backbone of our energy system, and still is. Massive opportunity, of course, from offshore wind, as we start to see some of the world's largest offshore wind farms and floating offshore wind farms are developed and operating around about Scotland. But we've got to expect that people will kind of catch us up on that, because there are very large countries, the US, Japan, China, desperate, India as well, desperate to be part of the renewables revolution. Absolutely, pushing money into this because they recognise the opportunity. And that's where Scotland can actually be world leading, is actually being the first to make all of this operational. And the other element of this is not just pushing the generation, it's the integration of generation through things like pump storage hydro, which we've had in Scotland for many, many years. Hydro is a huge success story in Scotland, and absolutely about throwing power out to places of the country that can be quite difficult to wire up in terms of infrastructure and that kind of thing. And obviously looking now at battery storage, the new story, of course, around about hydrogen. So that's where Scotland can really bring it all together. I think Scotland has the kind of energy transition in a nutshell. We've got all the technologies we need to make it happen. We've got a legacy fossil fuel sector that we need to transition. Not everyone has that too, but coming alongside that, you've got a number of people and skills and a lot of technology that is actually applicable to the energy transition as well. So I think we're actually in a really great place here.
And it is that combination of the natural environment and the skills, because if people be aware, but Aberdeen, for instance, in Scotland is been known for decades now as the energy hub for Europe. So it's a country that seems to have the natural resources, seems to have the skills, seems also, as far as I can understand it, have a kind of cross-party consensus largely on the need to decarbonise. So given all those tailwinds, why isn't Scotland already world leading, already at the leading edge of this stuff, have far better capacity than it has at the moment? Let me interrupt you very, very briefly. It's important with these podcasts that we hear from you as well. We're all learning in this clean energy transition. So please, if you can, click like, subscribe, and of course, leave your comments below.
So there's a bright future for the North Sea, absolutely a bright future for the North Sea, and it's going to be the home of our offshore wind turbines, which are going to help to power the world. And that's one of the conundrums that we do need to kind of come to get to grips with, is that the way that the system is set up just now, transporting and distributing electricity, really, really challenging. And so it's one of the key tasks that we're putting our mind to right now, and we're seeing some really, really interesting stuff happening in that place, which is regulatory stuff, which is not generally what everybody finds particularly sort of sexy or exciting, but it is where we've made really great strides. So I would argue that actually we are world leading. We certainly are. It's not an easy task to stay in that place, as I've said. We've got to expect people to catch us up, but continuing with that ambition is really, really important. Not pulling back now. Definitely moving forward and working out how you operationalize a low carbon economy. So you do. We've demonstrated that you can do growth as well as decarbonise at the same time. We're now at the really difficult bit of that journey. We've done, as everybody knows, the kind of low-hanging fruit. We've a lot of our decarbonisation story in Scotland and the UK has been driven by the electricity system. It's happened behind closed doors. But we do have all of the ingredients that mean we can forge ahead and actually get onto the next stage, which is the really, really challenging bit, which is how we work out how we decarbonise our industry and maintain its competitiveness as we go, how we decarbonise our households and again, ensure that that's affordable as we go, because we all know that kind of energy trilemma, as it was, is a quadrilemma. It's growing all the time, different facets coming into to do with affordability and practicality and energy security, and bringing all of that together is where actually the Scotland and the UK have that really strong competitive advantage, because exactly as you say, people, good institutions, relatively stable, of course, politically, that's a really, really big thing. It's been something that's been a real challenge of late, and that political consensus that you're talking about absolutely come to the fore in terms of that challenge that we've seen, and something that we need to double down on as a sector to make sure people understand exactly what we offer. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it as well, and what we bring along the way, which is, so much more than just being a sort of technology or a fuel. We bring communities together around about projects. We can drive energy into places in the country that previously weren't on sort of the larger networks and things like that. So there is a huge opportunity for us just to really, operationalise, like I say, that low carbon energy system and make sure that it delivers benefits at every step of the way as we go.
And I should say lots of other countries are racing to catch up now. If somebody's watching this outside of the British Isles and thinking, what, we need to step up as well.
Yeah.
What are the lessons they can learn from Scotland so far?
Yeah. So I was in Norway last week at an international conference on floating wind. And one of the things that they are very envious of is actually been our licensing regime, the Scotwind licensing round. They really feel that Scotland displayed such high ambition with that. Now, and I know there's mixed views around industry, even around about that, which is, Scotland pushed out so much more ambition than we were expecting. What Scotwind is? Yeah, of course. So Scotland is the offshore wind licensing round, which is effectively just, we've leased some sites through the Crown Estate Scotland process in order to develop offshore wind farms, fixed offshore wind farms and floating offshore wind farms. And effectively, you've bought the land to build your house. That's what Scotland really is. So it's the start of a process. It's where you kind of get the option to buy your site and then move it forward from there through doing your kind of environmental consenting, and then moving on to actually building and operating the wind farm.
So the licensing has been really positive. Is that something other countries are looking at actively? And is there anything else in terms of actually getting these projects built? Because Scotwind, I think, is something like 25 gigawatts. I mean, it's a massive potential. But actually, Scotland at the moment doesn't have anything like that in terms of generation. How do you bridge that gap from, I don't know, it's 4 or 5 gigawatts we have at the moment, up to that 25 gigawatts? I mean, that is a massive leap.
Yeah, in offshore wind, it is a massive leap. Yeah, it is. But what we're seeing, the technology will help us. the technology is getting better all the time, and starting to hear about, enormous turbines and the way that we kind of put them together and how we make them operate together, co-locating them as well with other sources of power or storage, such as hydrogen as well. But scaling that up is a massive task. You're absolutely right. We are looking to quadruple our generation capacity, as a country, as a UK as a whole as well, in order to meet our net zero targets. And in Scotland, huge targets. We've got 2030 target for 11 gigawatts of offshore wind, which, again, will expand as we go. Scotwind goes beyond that 2030 point. We've also got ambition from 20 gigawatts of onshore wind as well. We also have kind of a number of pumped storage hydro projects sitting, waiting in the wings to come forward, because we're looking for that market mechanism in order to help blend them into the system as well. All of that is going to take massive amounts of investment. That's the key thing, is capital investment that's going to come in as a result of these big projects. And it's something that we've really started to see mobilise. If we look at things like jobs figures, for example, we can really track over the last couple of years when we've seen really big sites like Murray East, like Seagreen, like Nartnaguir come online, and what that's done to the job figures, really bumped them up. Now offshore wind supports around about 15,000 jobs. Which is as a direct result of seeing some of these projects really start to take off. So that's the next key thing, is delivery, right? We need capital investment. We need absolute delivery on projects, really, really pushing fast and hard on the timelines. Grid capacity, everyone in the industry, and probably much more widely, even probably my mother, recognises that grid is an issue and that we're working on. But after having spent 20 years in regulation, I think some of the changes that we've made, and again, this is where you come into that world leading space, some of the changes that have been made over the last 12 to 18 months here in the UK from a regulatory perspective, just opening up, the compact a little bit, accepting that actually, limiting ourselves to the kind of just the 5-year windows or 6-year windows of regulatory investment, and actually cracking that open and looking to do something more, like the accelerated transmission regime and everything else that goes along with that, are really quite groundbreaking. So it's more of that. That's what I want to see, is more of that.
And just so people understand, this is essentially where the regulator has said, instead of incremental investment, maybe up to 5 years at a time, let's be bold. Let's take a look at 10, 15 years and then make sure there's an investment regime there. And you're saying that kind of certainty is helping accelerate the transition, is that correct?
Absolutely. It puts the UK in a really strong, and Scotland in a really strong space in terms of being investable and having projects to invest in. So if you put that all together with the leasing round that we were talking about, with the onshore wind sector deal that we've brokered with the Scottish Government, to pull forward more than double what we currently have in terms of onshore wind, looking at how we can integrate things like pumped storage hydro, means that we've got a great offer for anybody looking, to invest capital, looking to invest money. I think renewables probably is a slightly longer return period, just because our projects do, they're very big projects. They go through a lot of robust processes to get to the operational point, but actually very strong returns in there for any investor, and making sure that we keep that environment really as safe as possible. And that's about consistency of policy, and that's making sure that we are driving consistently towards that kind of low carbon energy system that I'm talking about, and being able to sort of really map out like where those projects are going to come into that.
So imagine I'm a policymaker then, and you're speaking on behalf of the industry. Give me specific things you need me to do to help deliver the transition at pace, given what seems to be a fairly good starting point in terms of Scotland and the rest of the UK.
So supporting that regulatory process, supporting that boldness and agility in regulatory thinking, really, really important. Looking at the bit that government needs to do. So in general, they work on the kind of planning and consenting side of things. I think, again, no secret that we want to see acceleration and more certainty in there. This isn't about, reducing that process to make it non-robust. What it is about making that process a bit more predictable, predictable, helping us to understand what we need to do if we need to mitigate impacts of our projects, if we need to make compensations somewhere for those projects. All of that stuff needs to really become a bit more visible and a bit more certain. So that's two things that we really need from government. The other thing we need is for them to be a good partner as well, and that comes into that, consistency of policy making always will drive stronger investment flows. And at sometimes as well, we're starting to see conversations with government about them potentially becoming a co-investor in our sector. We've seen that model work quite well internationally. If you look at some countries, France, Norway, others, Denmark, you've seen really strong kind of public-private partnerships. And that is in recognising too that this is not just something that will follow an electoral cycle again. Crack open that kind of 5-year window and think in a much more strategic way, 10, 20 years into the future. This is what's going to provide jobs for the next 2-3 generations. And then something else that they need to kind of come in and help us with is the human capital side of it, how we get our people ready and how we create a workforce of scale to manage just the enormity of the pipeline of projects we have.
Right, you've convinced me then. So policymakers help out and they give you that policy certainty, and investors can come in and invest the cash. Let's turn to that skills point then, because given the scale of investment, the change that's going to be needed, and you've talked about 15,000 jobs just in offshore alone at the moment, that presumably is going to increase very significantly over the next few years. Do we have the skills? And if we don't have the skills and the people, what do we need to do to get the skills and people to deliver this transition? Let me interrupt you very, very briefly. It's important with these podcasts that we hear from you as well. We're all learning in this clean energy transition. So please, if you can, click like, subscribe, and of course, leave your comments below.
Yeah. So there's various bits of research out there. So I think Robert Gordon University have said we need something like 225,000 people by the end of the decade. Yeah. So it's really, really important to recognise that there's a job for industry in here, but also a job for government, which is that, it starts at all levels, which is one, creating that vision of, these are amazing infrastructure projects. They're really incredible. It takes not just, engineers who are able to fix turbines at the end of this. A renewable energy project's got a good sort of 10 to 15 year lifespan before that. Generally starts on someone's desk, as an idea, as a concept, goes through contracting. So that's professional services, that's legal, it's accountancy, it's insurance as well, another really, really important part of that. Then through all of the sort of development phase, you then move into, doing the environmental consenting. And that, again, really, really sort of broad breadth of job and roles within that. So trying to explain that to people that this is an industry that can cater for a lot of different skill sets and a lot of different needs as we go. Then you move into the construction phase. Really, really, high competition for skills in there, really high competition for skills in there. The largest part of the phase of the project, of course, is the operations and maintenance phase, probably 20 years in that space as well. And again, looking at really high value skill sets. Predictive analytics is something that as an industry we've really embraced to try and fault find, to try and make it cheaper to operate and maintain a lot of the fleet that we have out there. So that's where government needs to help us, is to make sure that we've got, an education system that can support all of this. I think a lot of conversation being held with government too about how they handle things like migration policy, just simply to meet the numbers, in terms of skills shortages. They can help us with the skills gap point, which is sometimes it'll be transitioning people from other sectors. A lot of conversation about the just transition of the oil and gas workforce into renewables at the moment, and skills passporting, making all of that easy, making it easy for us to pick people up from school and use them, making it easy for us to bring people in from other sectors and use them, making it easy, for us to, if we have a particular requirement, we do need a higher number of people, to think about how that plays into wider sort of social policies as we go.
And that struck by that number of 225,000 jobs. I know might not be exactly that, but that's a big. It was going to be a big number anyway. It sounds like. And are these real jobs? Are these good jobs? Because anybody who's been watching this space for a long period of time, Scotland's been described previously as it's going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind energy. I'm not sure if you think that's a helpful phrase or not, but there's a lot of promise. And then people look for, well, where are the manufacturing jobs? Where are the supply chain jobs? Where are the highly skilled jobs? Where's that value coming into the economy and into various communities? Do you think we're getting to a point where we're just going to see that accelerate much more? So moving from lots of promise to actual delivery, or are people still going to wait for some of those high value jobs to actually appear?
Yeah, I think it's easy to sort of be a bit disheartened, and I would urge everybody not to be. We've achieved a lot actually so far, and one of the issues that we've had, that phrase, the Saudi Arabia of renewables, it comes up time and time again. But that was always kind of predicated on having a steady pipeline, which we did not have. And that was something that we've continually pointed out, which is deployment equals employment. We haven't deployed at the rate that we'd hoped to for various different reasons, but largely down to the lack of consistent energy policy and a lack of consistent infrastructure policy. We need those things in order for us to thrive. And the signalling is hugely important because we are so heavily reliant on private sector investment, which can go into anything, anywhere. And that's what we've got to remember, is that there are so many competitors in here looking for that money, looking for projects, all over the globe. And so that's kind of where you have to be really, really clear, is that if you don't have projects, you're not going to have jobs. On the supply chain, really, really fascinating part of the story, particularly for us at Scottish Renewables. It's been a really, it's the mainstay of our membership. We have about, 400 members now. And we've seen a really huge uptick recently in the supply chain, really wanting to come and speak to us about, where are the projects? When are they going to commission? When are they looking to put contracts out there? How do we be part of this? Because they really want to be part of this. And a lot of optimism through the supply chain. But we've got to remember, we use the words or the phrase supply chain. It covers a huge array of businesses, and it can cover, from, we've got the different tiers of businesses. So very large tier 1 type contractors who will cover everything in terms of design and engineering and deployment, all the way down to people, single sole traders who will support things like the kind of environmental consenting process by doing assessments, being on the ground, looking at stuff. That will need a different treatment at different levels, kind of thing, in order to develop the supply chain. But supply chain growth really is where the prize sits, because it's so diverse. They provide so many jobs, and it is that high value stuff that is potentially exportable. That's where we've moved to now as a world in terms of the economies. We're exporting people and services now rather than products. And that's a great thing for the industry that we're in, because we've got so much to offer.
Let's talk about technologies then, if we can do for a little while, because at the very beginning of this conversation, you talked about the fact that Scotland's got a variety, patchwork, I think you described it, in terms of technologies. Talk us through a couple of those. So what are you most excited about? What do you think is kind of underappreciated in terms of its potential? We hear an awful lot about offshore wind. We've discussed that so far. So maybe let's park that aside. What are the other technologies that you think, wow, that's really exciting?
Every technology is exciting to me, right? I'm a complete technophile, and I always believe, you can have different views of technology. You can, at the moment, we're having a lot of conversation about AI, as a wider society.
Everybody is.
Yeah. Is it a good or a bad thing? And I inherently come to this with the mindset that these things are good. What I really love, and where I'm getting really, really excited, is not necessarily about us inventing lots of new things, right? So you're not going to, we've got onshore wind, offshore wind, hydro. You're not going to reinvent it. How we deploy it is the bit that I'm starting to get really, really excited about. So if I look again at what we do at Scottish Renewables, we run a number of awards programmes, and those are to recognise and to celebrate our key successes. Without fail, the largest number of nominations we get is for the innovation category, and that's the bit that's really, really exciting. We are not an industry that stands still. We continually look to take what we've got, which is a real strength in terms of generation and deploying generation, and now we're starting to look at integrating it. And another really interesting sort of element to that awards programs nominations point in terms of innovation is that we now have so many, we've had to split that category. We split it into software and services, and we're splitting it into products as well, because there's just so much going on in terms of innovation. So when I start to see things like an onshore wind farm with co-locating with solar and with hydrogen and potentially with electric vehicle charging, that gets me really, really excited, because that's absolutely fundamental parts of kind of the human existence being met by the industry that we work in. And that is really, really exciting.
And in terms of challenges for the industry, what are the kind of big challenges? You've talked about some of them already, I suppose, but what, when you're thinking, really frustrates you, we could fix that with a bit of the right effort?
That's such a good question. I think when I came into the sector, so I didn't start in energy. I came in from a completely different sector. It's still sort of regulated utilities. But one of our biggest problems was not telling our story very well, and really not celebrating how successful we have been, but also what we're planning to do for the future. So I think that's something, articulating the vision is really important, and it's becoming ever more important. I talked a bit earlier there about, where we are on this kind of journey. We've done the easy bit, we've done the behind closed doors bit, which is that decarbonisation of electricity supply. We now move into a place where, we've always had that kind of visual impact through onshore wind. A turbine is something on the landscape, particularly in Scotland and certain areas in Scotland that people are very used to, and most people are attracted to. They quite like it. But now we're going to have to do some really, really big stuff. We're at an absolutely kind of, an inflection point, if you will, where we are going to have to do a very different scale to what we've done previously. We are going to disrupt people a lot more than we were going to. And actually explaining to people what that means, how long it's going to last for, why it's really, really important. What frustrates me is at times I feel sometimes we apologise for existing as an industry, when actually what we're here to do is good things. It's to change the world. It's to take us to a new place. And that is always a difficult journey. Disruption is difficult, but what you get at the end is always going to be worth it. And I think that's the bit that frustrates me a little, is that we really need to start articulating that vision much more widely and getting everybody as excited as we are about what's about to happen.
And do you think we are in that kind of delivery phase now? Because as you point out, there's been a long time where everybody's been talking about the potential, and they've set ambitions and targets, and, everybody's got a gigawatt target somewhere. But now, lots of targets for 2030. We're now halfway through that decade pretty much. As the rubber hits the road, to use that terrible phrase, do you think that there is going to be friction, there is going to be kickback on the industry as it becomes more mainstream?
Yeah, I think we've got to expect that. You don't get to mainstream without people kind of questioning what you're doing, and that's a good thing. We aren't just a normal industry. I think that's the thing that we need to be really clear about, is that we perform a function within society, not just to drive economic growth. That's a great part that we do that, but we can make daily lives better. And I don't say that lightly, and I'm by no means, unaware of the criticisms of our sector, and I'm happy to address that kind of head on. But what we do need to be clear about is that way that we can change people's lives. If you take this to its end point, once you've got a renewables-led system, we can use some of the work that we do in communities. We can use some of our community benefit payments. We really do need to overhaul that system as well to make sure that benefit does trickle down to where it needs to get to. We've been in the middle of a cost of living crisis for nearly 2 years now, predicated largely on some of the real fundamentals of life, energy cost and food cost. We can really help on one of those. And that, again, if you're talking about key frustrations, is that, there's no quick fix to that. And trying to pretend that there is a quick fix is the wrong thing to do. It is going to take a long, long journey for us to be able to really, attack the consumer bills issue. But, bringing more expensive forms of generation onto the system is not the way to do that. Doubling down and delivering on the cheapest forms of new energy is exactly how you do that. But it's not just that. We have to start at the very end of, the user end of this process and think that way about how we make homes better, how we insulate them better, how we teach people to use less energy, how we create devices that manage energy better, how we create lifestyles that are less energy intensive and energy hungry than they have been in the past. And we've got a role to play in all of that, not just say from creating generation, but by supporting things like rollout of solar within communities to try and pull something out of people's bills as quickly as possible. And that's the bits that we probably again need to be a bit clearer with government about, is what's the art of the possible here. We're not going to be able to reduce bills overnight. That's just not realistic. But what we can do is as a byproduct of what we do, kind of work at all sorts of levels within society to address that really tough challenge that everybody's, finally kind of working towards, which is actually just creating a better world, a cleaner planet and a better life for its citizens.
How do you think the industry can help local communities then, who themselves, especially in a country like Scotland, where you are rich in these natural resources, if you live in the north of Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, almost any part, there will be very strong local communities who will want to have their own energy infrastructure. Are you as an industry helping them with that?
I think energy infrastructure in communities is a great thing. I do. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And we've seen it. My background was telecoms, and we saw this with community broadband and just how enabling that can be for a community. And alongside those conversations, if you look at Applecross, for example, they developed community broadband and community hydro at the same time, which I think is amazing. Yes, as a sector, we are very, very focused on the heavy lifting. We're very, very focused on scale, and that is correct. That is right. That's how we run businesses. That's how we decarbonise. That's how we get to net zero. But along the way, I think it's something like £1 million a month goes into communities within Scotland to help, with a plethora of different things. But I think where we could come in a little bit heavier is to help them think strategically themselves. What would be strong community assets here? What would create strength in terms of energy security? What would create strength in terms of, making a better transport network? If you go to any community and ask them, what it is that they're really interested in, it's schools, it's health, it's transport, it's those kind of daily life things. So what's our role in that? Let's think a bit more about that. So I do think as a sector we do that quite well, actually. More to be done, always more to be done. We're going to hit a new era as well of kind of community and shared ownership. And again, let's talk reality about that. There are going to be some communities who will be more than willing and able to take that on. And don't forget that when you become a project partner, you accept some of the risk, you accept some of the finance, you accept the kind of, the responsibility for some of this and the accountability for big projects. Some communities won't want to do that. Some communities won't have either the capacity or capability to manage what is, fairly complex and sophisticated contracting, and they are going to have to, come up with the same thing that we do as a sector, guarantees, say insurance payments, that kind of thing. And so we need to work out how you can create other styles of community involvement or community development or community ownership that will help to hit the same kind of objectives, but perhaps maybe without having quite such a strong kind of stakeholder role involved.
But we also want to hear from you, so please add to the comments below and let us know what you think of the podcast so far. After all, we're all learning. Let me nearly finish it with one more point, which is, if you look at the geography of Scotland, you're here in the northwest of Europe, fantastic, as I keep on saying, renewable resources. But a relatively small population, about 5 million people, an island with about 60 or 70 million people. How big a constraint is that infrastructure of getting the energy from when it's generated to some of those demand centres? SSE is involved in that as a transmission operator in the north of Scotland, so for full disclosure. But this will apply to lots of your members, presumably. What do your members think of that? What are the solutions to that problem that they prefer and would like to take forward?
It is It is a really difficult issue for Scotland, right? And again, this has crossed a number of the jobs that I've had. So I talked there about telecoms and broadband and mobile networks. It was a real challenge to get those rolled out into the rural areas of Scotland. One of the reasons why I'm here in this job, because I recognise that renewables could have the power to do things slightly differently, because the resources lay different, in a different part of the world, which is that around our sort of coastlines and in our more rural areas, they genuinely do have that power. And, we've seen that over the decades and over generations, the Power to the Glens project. I'm immensely proud to be part of a country that did that.
This is hydropower, helping switch lights on in communities around the north of Scotland.
In the north of Scotland. And I always felt very strongly too that one of the key issues in rural areas in Scotland is transport cost. And again, if you could electrify transport networks, around those kind of areas, you could really start to shift the dials, change the economic geography of the country. So I think that's a really, really important part of this. I think it does require us to think quite differently to do that, because infrastructure does naturally gravitate towards centres of population. That is how it does things. And we are sort of working with a system as well that we're sort of pushing to change. And particularly, it's a bit technical, but the sort of, obviously the transmission network use services charges, a real issue for us here in Scotland, because they are predicated on an outdated system of thermal generation, which was where you just built a big fossil-based, system or factory effectively next to where people live. Whereas now we are looking to do things, differently and bring power in from different areas of the country. So we need to not just look at the physical infrastructure, which is a really, really key part of this. And your colleagues in the network side of the business are working really hard on that public acceptance point, because it is a genuine challenge being able to speak to communities and help them to understand actually that they're part of not just something that's going to go through their community, but they're actually part of an industrial revolution for the whole of the country, and make sure that that they feel that they're being treated fairly as part of that process. But yeah, looking at those kind of areas and trying to sort of change the way that we move stuff about. Hugely interesting conversation about hydrogen. Why is hydrogen not really taking off? We have excess power. We have the ability to generate it. We've got electrolyzers. The costs will come down as you do that more at scale. One of the key issues is the transmission and distribution network. Is how would you move it around? Is it ships? Is it pipelines? Really, fascinating conversations and decisions still to be made around all of that. But also, how would you draw the picture of where you would place storage? Where is the optimum place to put storage? These are all, genuinely exciting questions, and absolutely, ones that we don't have all the answers for, right? We don't have all the answers for. The pattern of demand is going to shift. New industries are going to come along that are going to shift it again, coming back to AI, loads of conversation, hugely energy hungry industry. Where do they locate? Do they locate next to us? Do we, we can't move the power in terms of renewables, essentially. So how do we drive the other strategies and policies to make sure that we optimise the natural gifts that we have in terms of that very diverse set of renewable energy inputs into the system?
Finally, if somebody is just thinking about getting into this industry or are just starting out in their career, what's your advice to them? What would you be saying to them?
I'd be saying, do it, go for it, come and join us. We need everybody, as we've talked about. There's a huge demand for people and skills. I think don't be thinking that all we are is engineers. There's so much more to the sector than that, and what an exciting sector to be part of. I can't be more of an evangelist or a champion for the sector than I already am, because I genuinely do believe that we're changing the world. So if you want to be part of something that's going to change the world, then come and join the renewable energy sector.
And when you're talking to your friends or family about the industry and the work that you do, what makes them think, wow, actually, that is interesting? What captures that attention most?
I think the great thing about our industry is that we've got some sort of iconic imagery, right? A turbine, I personally believe that they're beautiful and particularly graceful. Everybody sort of recognises the turbine for what it is, which is it performs a strong function in society. I think one of the things, or a couple of things that people don't realise, again, and this is about us having done a lot of stuff behind closed doors, is it's just how long Scotland's history is in this game. So James Blythe invented, and deployed the first sort of wind turbine here, onshore wind turbine here in Scotland, in Marykirk in the 1800s. That's really exciting to think about, how long that's been part of the technology map of Scotland and what our influence on the rest of the world is. And then the other thing that I find really interesting that I tell people about is that we've got a 100-year-old hydro turbine here in Scotland, still operational. So I think that too kind of gets people thinking a little bit and a bit exciting. Now let's think about the future. So how, the system is going to change, how we're going to use technology like AI, like predictive analytics to drive down demand, to charge your electric vehicle kind of while you're at work during the day, perhaps when it's parked and there's available sunlight, bring that home, plug it into your house, now becomes the battery that powers your house. That stuff's really, really exciting. So I speak to people about that. And the other thing that they find really exciting about it is just how interested everybody is in it. When you start to talk about renewables, you kind of find that people have a view on something, whether they like a turbine or whether they don't like a turbine. And then once you start to unpack that with them about what it actually means, you'll find that most people are really keen to do something. They're really keen to do something. We took some road shows out on the road when we had COP26 here in Glasgow, and invariably people wanted to come and talk to us about this. They want to talk about things like renewable heat for their homes. They want to know what they can do. So that, when I'm talking to my mum or I'm talking to other people, generally is thinking about small steps that the individual can take, because actually most people do want to be part of this whole journey.
Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope that was valuable for you. What was the one thing that struck you? Please leave us in the comments below and let us know. We're all learning, as I say, so if there's something valuable you found from this podcast, please share it with your friends or colleagues. Until next time, bye-bye.